because since all the students of KS School are here, I will really urge them to please join IEEE membership, because that way you will get benefited by many more such technical talks and conferences and many activities. So I'm just going to present you a set of slides which will just give you a small highlight on what are the benefits of being IEEE student member. So I'll just share my screen. I'll stop the video. I hope everyone is able to see my screen.
Yes, yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, yeah, we can see.
So a brief presentation on what is IEEE and what are the benefits of IEEE. So IEEE is one of the oldest institution in the world for engineers, and it was initially founded by the pioneers, scientists Alexander Graham Bell and Thomas Edison, and Tesla was also among its charter members. So IEEE was initially American Institute of Engineers, which was later on merged, and then it was formed Institution of Electrical and Electronics Engineers. So it is a recognized global leader in fostering world-changing technologies. So there are around 1,300 global standards of which are given for benefit of society by IEEE. Now, out of these, one standard which you are just cannot do without in your day-to-day usage, I'll give you an example, is IEEE 802.11 standard, 802.11 A, B, G, and N. You may not have heard of this standard by its name, but you are every day using it by the name of Wi-Fi. So similarly, just like Wi-Fi, there are thousands of so many standards which IEEE is defining and designing every single day. Here I will just give the broad global presentation of IEEE. If you can see that the number of members that are across the globe. So we have around 4,50,000 members all over the world in more than 160 countries, and the number is still counting and increasing. We have 1,25,000 student members, and they are also continuously, the numbers are increasing. 334 sections are there in 10 geographic regions in the world. We have 2,116 technical chapters which are under with the local members, like one of the chapters is IEEE Bangalore chapter. We have 3,005 student branches in all over the world with so many universities across all the countries. Then we have student branch chapters, 1,481 of them. And 486 are affinity groups. Like, for example, we have Young Professionals Group, Women in Engineering Group, Life Members Group. So these are the affinity groups, which are also you are welcome to be a part of. The organization structure of IEEE, we have different regions. We have divided the entire world into 10 regions, and under these regions, we have different chapters. So like for you, more relevant will be how I explain is that your student branch will fall under the IEEE Bangalore section. This is the home page of IEEE. So once you become member, you can see that you will be getting lots and lots of information like artificial intelligence, blockchain, Internet of Everything, and so on and so forth. You will get a benefit of IEEE Collaboratech, which you will be a part of, which is a kind of social networking website for all the IEEE members, where you can connect to each other, form your own technical network, your professional network, and so many ideas you can share over here. Then we have IEEE Explore Digital Library. This all of you might be knowing, because there are so many publications coming from this, from the IEEE Digital Library. IEEE Spectrum magazine is there, which you will get free access to. You will also be able to become a member of so many IEEE technical communities and councils. Most of them are free of cost and you can easily join them. IEEE TV is there where you can connect to so many different channels which are dedicated for the latest and greatest in technology. IEEE Center for Leadership of Excellence for your skill development and your personality development and volunteering personality enhancement. Then IEEE Standards Association, which I spoke about earlier, which is responsible to give so many standards. Then IEEE Standards University. Then what are the benefits to student? You will be having, you will be by volunteering, of course, you will be networking, you will be connecting to so many people out there in professional world. There will be so many scholarship grants, fellowships. IEEE sponsors students for various participating in conferences globally. Then there are some examples like SITE, Women in Engineering, Data Engineering, RFID, Sensor Council, Internet of Everything, GIS Community. All this is absolutely free for you to join. Like you don't even have to pay for it once you become IEEE member. Then these are the resources for students where you can actually have an email ID with IEEE.org as your extension. Like any Gmail ID can be converted into it. Then we have an IEEE Resume Lab, which will be helpful for you for your future career pursuits. We have various humanitarian programs, so many magazines, student travel grants are there, education and career resources. There are immense amount of technology and career resources. Then certification courses are there which offer deep discounts for student members. We have the IEEE Resume Lab where you can make beautiful resumes which are very attractive and which will be immediately taking attention of your employers. Then you can get involved with IEEE in like we are there. We are all, myself, Dr. Pushpamala, Divya Madam, we are all professional people working in our organizations, but we are volunteering here, which is very, very helpful for interaction and increasing our knowledge and knowledge of all our community. So thank you so much for your attention and for your time. So I wanted to wind it up as soon as possible. Does anybody know how to stop sharing this? Can anybody help me in okay, stop. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And here onwards, I will pass over the stage to Dr. Pushpamala. Dr. Pushpamala will give you an intro to Dr. Patra, who has been so kindly agreed to come over and give him his time and share his technical knowledge with us. Please, Dr. Pushpamala, kindly take over the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Soma ma'am. Good evening, everyone. We have with us Dr. G.K. Patra, who is working as a senior principal scientist in the High Performance Computing and Cybersecurity Group at the CSIR 4th Paradigm Institute. And this was earlier known as the CSIR Center for Mathematical Modeling and Computer Simulations. He is also a professor in the Faculty of Mathematical and Information Sciences of the Academy of Science and Innovative Research, which is again an institute of national importance by the Government of India Act of Parliament. His fields of interest include various security aspects of current generation, cyber physical systems, and high performance computing. At present, he is engaged in research on security and safety of connected vehicles using artificial intelligence, blockchain, and cryptography. He has published around 60 research papers in reputed journals and referred conference proceedings. He also has many best paper awards in international conferences for providing security solutions based on neural network highest to his credit. He's got his postgraduate and PhD in electronics from Behrampur Institute, Behrampur University. He's also supervised PhD students, and currently he has some students carrying out research under him. He's one of the key members who has made a significant contribution in establishing one of the largest supercomputing facilities at the country at CSIR Fourth Paradigm Institute. In addition to these, he is also a member of the Industrial Advisory Board and Board of Studies of many postgraduate and engineering institutions. So we welcome you, Patra sir. I would like to brief you out on the abstract for today's talk. So today's talk is on blockchain, which is a new technology of trust, and blockchain is powered by cryptography. Currently, blockchain is believed to be a disrupting technology that has the potential to affect the trust paradigm in next 5 years. It is effectively a shared ledger between groups of people, which is immutable. It differs from a typical database in the way it stores information. So blockchain stores data in blocks that are then chained together. I would like to cut short here and hand over the dais to Dr. Patra, who will be speaking to us on blockchain. Over to you, sir.
Thank you for the nice introduction, and then also for the invitation to give a talk to a student community. And I'm also very happy that few of my students are also joined here today. Murthy is there, and then Chandni is there. So they all have worked with me on various aspects of blockchain. Especially I work on connected vehicles and then our applications to that. However, today's talk, I'm not going to talk much about the work that I'm doing. I thought I will make it as simple as possible to give an idea about the basic blockchain, not to make people expert, but at least if somebody gets excited by this and then starts working on it. So I will share my presentation. Just bear with me. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, sir, we can see your screen.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. So as already said, I am going to talk about blockchain. Blockchain now word is not very new. People have been now talking about blockchain for quite a long time. But the basic idea is that it has still not reached the way people thought, the way it will actually capture the whole industry. What are the problems, why it has not done, and all. We will just a little bit discuss about those things. But what it has done is that it has given a new concept of trust, because trust always has been kind of a third party, like somebody needs to mediate to provide a trust. So that's something which it has changed, and especially this is the latest application of cryptography, which has actually created a very innovative application. Okay. So as it's already talked about me, I'm working as a senior principal scientist at CSIR Fourth Paradigm Institute. Now, just to give a small introduction about Fourth Paradigm Institute, why it is Fourth Paradigm. The science has actually moved from different paradigms. The first paradigm was basically observations, where like people like Galileo and all used to look at stars and other things, and then derive theories out of that. While the second paradigm of science was basically kind of experimental and kind of what you call as the theoretical, where people like Newton and all came out with laws, equations, basically representing the natural phenomenon in terms of mathematical equations. Then what came is the computational sciences. Computational sciences is the third paradigm of science, where you convert those mathematical equations into computer programs and run it on computers to provide better insights, as well as provide predictive capabilities. However, recently what has happened is now we come to the fourth paradigm, which is basically data sciences. So lots of data which are available around, and our institution, which was earlier called the Center for Mathematical Modeling and Computer Simulations, which was part of the third paradigm of science, has been moved to the fourth paradigm to work on data sciences, and that's where we work now. Also, I'm a professor at the Academy of Scientific Innovative Research, which is actually a kind of institute which actually it's a kind of multi-institutional things where all the CSIR labs, CSIR is Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, are part of this academic. It's actually an academic wing of CSIR. So I'm a professor there. So I am actually holding two dual designations. Before I start talking about blockchain, I would like to make a disclaimer because to make the presentations more informative and then easy for understanding, I have basically used contents, images from internet. And so I would like to say if and it is very difficult to for each and everything to acknowledge that. So I just make a generic acknowledgement that I thank all the authors whose contributions has been taken as input either from internet or in person for making this presentation. Especially I would like to thank George Levy. He's part of the Blockchain Institute of Technology, and he had a very nice presentation and about blockchain. So I have picked quite a bit of information from that. Now, what happens is like there are a few emerging technologies to drive the future. Now, if you are working in any one of them, that is good enough. These are basically the building blocks. They are not applications as such. They actually form part of application. They are the basic building blocks, and blockchain is one of them. You have other applications like artificial intelligence, virtual reality, robotics, IoTs, genetics, drones, big data, augmented reality, 3D printing. These are 10 essential technologies which are going to drive the future, and one of them is blockchain. So it's very important to understand what are the possible applications of blockchain and how blockchain can actually change things over the next few years. So my the agenda of my talk today is to provide a basic introduction to blockchain. Basically, 3 questions needs to be answered: what, why, and how. And then I will talk about the applications of blockchain, and then I will conclude my talk. Now let us start with how do we distinguish what is real and what is fake? Now, if we see somebody standing on the roadside, you might have seen it in maybe if you go to MG Road or some sort of those things. People will be selling these goggles, isn't it, glasses? Now, if it will be written as Ray-Ban on that, but it will be sold at 200 rupees. It might start at 2000, but then slowly you bargain it, and then they will get it for 200 rupees. Okay, now you know very clearly that it is fake. It is not really a Ray-Ban glass which is sold on a roadside on some specific streets. Now the same thing, you go to a showroom of Ray-Ban and then buy it. It will be at 4,000 rupees. To some extent, you believe that because it is a Ray-Ban showroom, and then whatever is there, whatever the glass we see there is a Ray-Ban glasses. So you don't mind paying 4,000 rupees and then buy them and then bring it. Now I want to buy something online. Now I just want to go to either Amazon or Flipkart or some such sort of online market, and then just select a Ray-Ban glass. Now it is sold at 3,000 rupees. Now it is neither at 200 rupees nor at 4,000 rupees. Now my question is, how do we believe that it is a real, it is not a fake glass that you are going to get it? Similar thing, suppose I want to buy a online art of M.F. Hussain. How do I ensure that it is not it is really by M.F. Hussain, and it is not also stolen? Maybe it is possible that somebody would have stolen it and then will be selling to me. So many times what is happening is online, when we buy something, we are forced to trust that particular service provider like Amazon or Flipkart, assuming that yes, he will be able to provide, because sometimes we really get a doubt when something is available at a cheaper rate online, while you go to market, you get it at a higher rate. There may be certain things which are okay, we can understand why it is cheaper, but then it will be so cheap that you will not even believe it. So these are something which where we really confuse between what is real and fake when we are doing things online. So do you have something where we can actually find out a mechanism by which we can find out whether it is a real one or fake one? Now, in the world where we are dealing with frauds, malware, cyber hackers, and other things, how do we trust the quality and integrity of the services? So the answer lies with a technology called blockchain, which believes in single source of truth. So only there is one truth. The rest of the things are false. Okay, which is verifiable because you can verify it whether it is really the truth or not, and tamper proof. Nobody will be able to change things on that, and unchangeable. So no cannot be changed. So if we just want to define what is a blockchain is a constantly growing ledger. Ledger basically means uh, if we want to compare ledgers, I hope you people would have, if you are student, you go to the library, correct? When you take a book, you sign in one book with the name, date, and other thing, and say that yes, you have taken the book. That's a ledger, okay? And that's what is a ledger. Similarly, when your passbook, bank passbook is a ledger. It gives information about what has happened. Okay. Now, a blockchain is a constantly growing ledger that keeps a permanent record of all the transactions that have taken place in a secure, chronological, and immutable way. What it means is that now many times you would have seen in movies and all, like to identify a thief or whatever it is, they will go to the library, tear off that particular page where all those like often ledger, and then take out. It is, if it is a blockchain, then it should not be doable. You should not be able to remove something from that. You should not be able, and things should be secure so that nobody will be able to change that. And it should be in a chronological order. So it should be properly verifiable and other things. So blockchain has four fundamental properties. One is it is foundational. It is not an application. It is only a building block. Okay, but it is a disruptive building block. It has applications in many fields. So it is going to affect many of the applications that currently we are not using them. And it is distributed. Distributed basically means that it is not like, okay, I have a blockchain. No, I am part of a blockchain. That basically means that it is basically like multiple people own that particular blockchain. Okay. Transparent basically means that we don't basically like nothing like a secret there. Everybody knows about everything, so there is a transparency, so nobody can cheat. Okay. And real time means it happens as and when it happens. Now, if you want to break the individual elements of a blockchain, it is a ledger, as I told you. It is a constantly growing ledger. That means it's like if you look at your attendance sheet in colleges, every year you get one new attendance sheet, correct? The other attendance sheet is removed from there. But here it's not like that. Once you have a ledger, it is constantly growing. There is nothing like something has already obsolete. No, everything is intact. Okay, and keeps track of all transactions, whatever has happened from whenever it started. Then it's a permanent. Nobody can basically change it. It is secure, chronological, so that it is easily like you can trace back what has happened, and immutable. That means there is no way you can basically change anything out of it. Now, where all it started? It all started with either a person or a group. Still, nobody knows who is this person. Satoshi Nakamoto in 2008, when he published a white paper on Bitcoin. Bitcoin, we will come to that. A peer-to-peer electronic cash system. Basically, what do you mean by peer-to-peer? We will talk about what is peer-to-peer a little later. The basic concept with this Bitcoin, what was proposed in 2008 by Satoshi Nakamoto, was that it doesn't rely on trust. It is a trustless environment. It depends on digital signatures, so uses complete online mechanism. It's peer-to-peer network, proof of work, like who can do the maximum amount of work, that we will discuss little later in detail. Then public history of transactions, that completely the history of transactions are available, so that anybody can verify at any point of time if somebody is cheating or somebody is doing anything. Honest independent nodes control majority of CPU computing power. We will get into these details. And rules and incentives enforced through consensus mechanism. This also we will go through. So this all started in 2008 when this this was first proposed. So I'm not a very big fan of Bitcoin, but then it becomes easy to understand blockchain with the concept of understanding Bitcoin. Because it is something which started with that, correct? So we will see what is Bitcoin. Bitcoin actually is a digital asset. Like we have assets, we have house as asset, land as asset, like, and then money as an asset. Like that, this is a digital asset. This is something which doesn't have a physical presence. Okay, and it's all done on what do you call that, on internet. Okay, and it is used to store values like the way we store gold, silver, like that. We can also store them, but not as a physical thing, and as a digital this one. When we use Bitcoin to send someone or buy something, you do not need to use bank or credit card or any third party agency. See, if you use your debit card, we use bank as our third party, because bank has to authenticate saying that yes, this much money is available on this person's account, so that much money can be transferred to a person A to person B. So a bank comes in the middle of that. But while for Bitcoin, the concept is little different. You don't have to have a bank in between. For example, for credit card like Visa or Maestro, these are the middle people who basically take care of it. Now, how this Bitcoin works? When you send an email to another person, you type an email address and send it to the person directly. So this is what happens. Then immediately the other person receives the message. And sometimes it takes some time because of some delays and other things, but it's almost kind of instant. The message goes. It's basically, so it is. This is a very good example of peer-to-peer communication. There is no third party involved in between to communicate between you and me. So that's why it is called peer-to-peer. If there is a third party is involved, then it is not peer-to-peer. Okay. However, if you want to send money to send to another person, then you need to go through a third party. You cannot directly send it to the other person, because it involves lots of things. It is like a bank is a third party, or credit card, Visa, etc., PayPal. Now you have so many other things like Paytm, then PayMe. They are all third party through whom only we can transfer money. We cannot directly transfer money like the way we do that. Okay, so so what is that? What is the difference between a peer-to-peer and the current way of transferring money? So for example, if I want to send a photo to another person, to my friend, I want to send a photo. So what I do, I just scan it, attach the photo in an email and send it. Correct. Now the other person who receives the photo can download it, and we think that a transfer has really happened. So why not in the similar way we can transfer the money also? Correct. Now let us understand this. Now when I send my photo through email, actually I have not sent the photo. I have actually sent a copy of the photo. So that means I have now two copies. One photo is available with me, and a copy of the photo is available with my friend. So that is where it differs from a transaction, a money transaction here. Okay. So this is what is called as a double spending problem. If I send money, if I want to send 100 rupees to another person, a copy of money goes, that is of no use. Correct. Or if actually money goes there and still I have the 100 rupees with me, that means I am actually creating a kind of wallet which is always full, like Akshar Bhandar. I can give it to anybody, whatever money is required. I can do that. but that doesn't happen, correct? So that is what is called double spending problem, where when I transfer money, it should be deducted from my account and it should be added to the others account. So that is a process which is which has to follow through some sequence. So that's the reason we need a bank who will actually ensure that money is deducted from my account and the money is credited to the account of the recipient. Okay, so this is something like if I want to send a photo to my friend by post, correct? When I put the photo inside my inside a cover and send it through post, what happens is exactly after that I don't have access to that photo because that has already gone. Similar thing happens when you actually transfer the money to the other account. Now, online, when we do it without a third party, now with third party, we understood that it is possible a bank or any other third party will ensure that money is deducted from my account and money is credited to another account. But if we want to do it without a third party, how is it possible? That's where blockchain comes into picture. And blockchain actually is kind of a decentralized distributed ledger technology, which actually enables us to transfer money without a third party. So let us understand what is a distributed ledger. Before that, we need to understand what is a centralized ledger. Okay. Now the current form of a bank is there. Then there are, suppose, say 4 clients, like four people who have account in the bank. Now what happens is bank always holds the master record. So whatever transaction happens are always with the bank. Now our passbooks, which are actually also a ledger, but it is associated with me. So if somebody transfers money to my account or I transfer money to somebody's account, those transactions are basically written into my passbook. Okay. Similarly, a person B also will have his own transactions, whether it is to or from its own transactions. Now, basically, so what happens is if there is a conflict, then bank has to come into picture and ensure that the conflict is resolved. But so what happens is bank holds the true state. So bank's ledger is the final. There is no like whatever my passbook prints and all, it is only to show that this is what is printed on my passbook. But eventually what is written into the central database, central ledger of bank is the final thing. Now, what is a distributed ledger? In a distributed ledger, we don't call it as clients because there is not like a server client configuration anymore. We call them as nodes. Okay, so multiple people will have access to the ledger which exists with everybody. So basically what happens is the difference with what my passbook, if it is a centralized ledger, and my passbook, which is distributed ledger, I not only will have transactions of my own, I also will have transactions of somebody else. Some X to Y has transacted, that transaction also will be available in my ledger. So that basically means that I will have access to all transactions which are available. So that is what is called a distributed ledger, where the ledger holds all the what you call the transactions which are possible. Okay, and everybody decides what is the true state. That means the same ledger has to be available with all. Everybody has to say that yes, what right now I have is available with all A, B, C, D, E, whatever, whoever is available. So that is what is called as a distributed ledger. And this distributed ledger is basically arrived at something called a consensus. We will look at some of the consensus algorithm in detail. So how does a distributed ledger works? So what happens is a user initiates transactions using the digital signature. Then there are a large number of network nodes available. It is all basically broadcast to them, saying that user A wants to transfer $100 or 100 rupees to user B. So that is basically broadcasted to everybody. Now everybody having the ledger with them can actually verify whether A have 100 rupees with him, which he can transfer it to B or not. It's like, suppose the ledger says that A has only 50 rupees, a transaction of 100 is not possible. So that can be said that no, now it cannot be done. Now what happens here is that earlier bank was doing that. If you don't have sufficient money, bank used to say, no, you don't have sufficient money to transfer. Here, a set of people, not a single entity, a set of people will say that yes, A has 100 rupees with him, which he can transfer it to B. There is no problem. So once the broadcasting is done, basically, the third block talks about one or more nodes begin validating each transaction. So how do you validate each transaction? Because as we said that in a blockchain, all history is given. So all history provides an information about the current state, like user A has how much dollar left with him. So all those verification can be done by multiple number of people. And if everybody agrees, yes, it is possible, then that can be basically agreed upon. Okay, now once that is agreed upon, that particular transaction is written to the ledger. Now ledger is a kind of a big document, correct? Now it is appended to that. Once it is appended, then the real transfer happens. That means, okay, money has got transferred to this person to this person. Because as we say, as you know, when we go to bank and collect money, they give some physical money to us. But when we transfer money online, like, there is nothing like physical. It's only a record, isn't it? It is only a record which says that, okay, this much money from here has gone to this much back, this one. Background, lots of transfer may be happening. Suppose I am transferring money from SBI to HDFC Bank. Now there will be lots of transfer which will happen background from a SBI to HDFC. So that will happen background. But then for you, it is like just a transfer. Okay, while if it is from SBI to SBI, that actually physically no transfer happens. It's only on record the transfer happens. So that is how the distributed ledger works. Now there is something called miner. They are very important in the Bitcoin net thing. So I'm giving Bitcoin as an example to understand the blockchain in a better way. Okay. Now, who are these miners? Miners are the people, group of people who actually does the real work of creating those blocks and creating those links. Now, we have not yet discussed about what is a block and how it is linked and all. We will get into detail. At this point of time, just understand that each of these transactions has to be next to each other in a chronological way, and that is how they are linked. So that's why each transaction, if you call it as a block, they can be linked to each other in a chronological way, so that it forms a chain. But it is not as simple as that. We will discuss little later about that. Now these miners are the guys who basically does lots of work to verify whether a transaction can be done or not, whether the particular person who claims to have $100 or 100 rupees with him and claims that he will transfer that money to the other person has that particular money or not. And this is the job of the miners. And when what we saw in the previous slide is that the nodes, multiple nodes will verify them. Okay, that's the job which is to be done by these miners. Okay, now who will form the final block is all actually decided through some process. We will again look into that in detail. So miners are basically people who process and confirm transactions. They say whether it is possible to agree upon this transaction or not. And to do that, they really need powerful computers. It's not easy to say that, okay, this person has, it's not easy just like the way we look at the bank. Okay, I have this much money left. It's not that, because nowhere in the blockchain it's written as money left. It is actually you have to calculate throughout the history till the beginning of the blockchain to calculate and say that yes, this person holds right now this much amount of money. Okay, and they use some there is some puzzle to decide who will be the successful miner using some puzzles and math problems they use. And of course, to do that, because why will somebody do it? They get some benefits out of it. Okay, so the role of miner is to build the blockchain of records that form the Bitcoin ledger. Now the records are kept in the form of blocks, as I told you, that suppose A transfers some money to B, then X transfers some money to Y. Those can be kept as a block. Block means a set of those transactions. Instead of making each transaction as one block, what they do is they actually put together whatever transfers or transactions happened in last 10 minutes. They put them together and then form a block. So that otherwise what will happen is the blocks will become unnecessarily too large, correct? The chain will be too long and then it becomes a problem. So every 10 minutes, if there are suppose 100 transactions has happened in 10 minutes, all are with timestamps. At what time, who transferred what, all are put together and put into one block. So new blocks are added every 10 minutes with all the new transactions, whatever has happened in that 10 minutes. And the miners are processing these different transactions. They build the blocks. When the block is confirmed, it is added to the blockchain. That basically means that once the block is formed, everybody has to agree, yes, the block is Pakka. All transactions, what has been written into the block is Pakka. Then only that will be added to the blockchain. Why? Because blockchain has a specific property that once you add it to that, you cannot change it. Okay, so that cannot be done. So what they do is they basically ensure before adding that whatever transactions which are recorded into this block are Pakka and doesn't need any modification. So the blockchain is built all the way back to the initial transaction ever regarded as the Genesis block. So as I told you, in 2008, this concept of blockchain came. The Genesis block is of January 3rd, 2009. So now the Bitcoin blockchain has started in January 3rd, 2009, and now it is still continuing. Okay. So that's the Genesis block. So every time you need to verify the transaction, actually you need to recalculate backwards till 2009 January and then ensure that a particular person has the required amount of Bitcoins available to transfer to the other person. Now, what is the role of cryptography in all these things? Now, as you know, many of you already will be knowing about what meant by cryptography. Basically, cryptography is a technique when you want to secure something, any digital information, and you want to secure them. It has four various applications. One is to ensure confidentiality, basically secrecy. So it basically uses secrecy. There are two ways of ways in which the secrecy is maintained. One is called symmetric key cryptography, where the same key is used for encryption and decryption. Encryption means converting a plain text to a ununderstandable text, so that anybody who has that also cannot understand what was the original text. While the real recipient should have the same key, so same in a small set of information using which he can decrypt it. Decrypt means converting this ununderstandable text again back to the understandable text. So that's what is called a symmetric key encryption. Then next is the public key encryption, where the problem with symmetric key is the same key has to be available both sides. How do you ensure that both have the same key? In order to avoid that, there is a concept of public key encryption, where you have one key for encryption and one key for decryption. Okay, so that's the concept there. We will not get into detail because our focus should be on the blockchain rather than cryptography. But public key cryptography is what is used for blockchain. That's what these highlighted things are all used for blockchain. Okay. Then the other thing is data integrity. Integrity basically means that to ensure that no modification has been done either to that data or while doing communication. So no modification has been done, so that the integrity of the data is maintained, and cryptography ensures that the data integrity is maintained. And for that, digital signatures are used. You might have heard about digital signatures quite a bit. And blockchain also uses digital signatures for many of its requirement. Similarly, the third application of cryptography is authentication. To ensure that it's like I send you something, to ensure that only you can read it. That's where the authentication comes into picture. And the other component is the non-repudiation. Basically, I can send it to you today and then say tomorrow, no, I didn't send it to you. So non-repudiation ensures that I cannot deny of sending and you cannot deny of receiving. So authentication and non-repudiations are taken care, and especially digital signatures are used, which are also used for the blockchain. So where does blockchain use cryptography? For initiating and broadcasting transactions, they use digital signatures and private key and public keys. And validation of transactions, where they have to validate a transaction, they use something called proof of work and certain alternatives, which are again based on cryptography. Then for chaining the blocks, when we want to connect the blocks to each other, they use something called hash function. I hope most of the people already know hash function, but let me just spend one slide on that. A hash function is a mathematically efficient computable function that has a fixed size. It's basically an algorithm. Anything you give it to that, a plain text or whatever it is you give it, it can actually give you a fixed size number. Okay, so that's what is called the hash output. Basically, it checks your integrity of the data. Now, there are lots of hashing algorithms which have been proposed over time. There are secure hashing algorithms with different versions, SHA-0, SHA-1, then like the SHA-256. Right now, most of the people use SHA-256. Okay, 256 basically means the output is the output basically is a constant output of size kind of 256 bits. Okay. Now, the last column, if you look at something called a collision. Collision basically means, see, when you give an arbitrary length of text into an algorithm and it gives you a fixed output, there is a chance that there can be two texts which are different from each other. When you input, it can actually provide the same output. Okay, that's what is called collision. So when we talk about SHA-0 and SHA-1, there are the collisions have been found. Okay, while for SHA-256 and 512, so far no collisions have been found. But if you really look at theoretically, there are certainly, because suppose I'm giving an 1000 bit input and I'm getting a 10-bit output. It is sure that for at least 100 of such inputs, I will get the same output. Correct. So, but then what happens is when you are talking about 256, it becomes so large. Finding out such similar text which will have some relation with each other will be very difficult. That's why they call it as that no collision which happens. So now the beauty of hash algorithm is, for example, see this. This is a great program with the data which we actually input to an hash algorithm. You can see what is actually a hash output of it. So then what we do is just add one character. I just added G in the end, program G. Okay. Then you see that the hash output which is given in the lower box, you can see that this is a completely different. Okay. That's what is the beauty of hash algorithm. Okay, and that's what is actually used for the blockchain creation of the blockchain. Now let us understand what is block hashing. So correct. Now let us just look at just the structure of a block. A block has a block identity like either block 1, block 2, and there is something called a nouns. Nouns is nothing but a number used once. Okay, it is not something which is sequential. It is not. It is just a kind of a random number which is used. Then you have a field for data where you can have a multiple transactions listed. Like, okay, at this particular time, node A has transacted X amount of money to node C, or at this much time. So around for whatever has happened in 10 minutes, that all can be written into the data field. Okay. Now the last field is the hash. What it does actually is that takes these numbers, block size, nouns, data, everything together, gives that as an input to the hash algorithm, and a hash value comes out. Okay. Now it is easy to do it because it is a one-way kind of algorithm. So you just do that. But what makes the blockchain more difficult is something called the difficulty level. Now you can look at this hash value that we have actually 4 leading zeros. Okay. Now the challenge is can we find out these nouns? The only data is constant because transactions are constant. Block number is constant because that's a sequential value. What can be changed is this nouns that can be changed. So can I find out a kind of nouns value so that the hash value will have 4 leading zeros? So it's a condition. So what we should do, we have to randomly start giving numbers after numbers after numbers, and see when we get 4 leading zeros, then we say, okay, now with this nouns I get 4 leading zeros. Okay, this is something which actually you can try yourself from this website, https://andres.com/blockchain/blockchain.html. There is something called mine. We will get into the detail of what is mining there in the next slides. So the idea is very simple, that a challenge is given to you, that you have the flexibility of changing the nouns. The only thing what you can change is the nouns, and you have to get a hash value which has 4 leading zeros. So that's the puzzle or a challenge which is given. Now multiple people actually start working on it. Whoever gets this challenge satisfies, finds out a nouns which satisfies this condition will win that. Okay. Now you look at what happens is, like in the previous slide, if we say that for this value 72608, the hash value, we got 4 leading zeros. Now I just changed the data. I just added a text data A. Okay. And the rest all remains same. But then you see the hash value is different. Now it doesn't have 4 leading zeros. Now how do I get 4 leading zeros after the data is added? Again, I need to find out appropriate nouns which can actually give it. Now for that, there are lots of different algorithms which are used. That is called mining algorithms. Now you can see this button mine. If I click on that, then it automatically, what will happen is that it will work on it and find out a appropriate nouns which will give me the 4 leading zeros. Okay, because the moment I added something, it becomes invalid. For the references, what I'm doing is, the green color means it's a valid block, and the red or pink or whatever color it is basically an invalid block. The moment I added A, it becomes an invalid block because it doesn't have 4 leading zeros. And I can change these nouns to different numbers, but it is not easy manually to do it. So what we do is we use these algorithms of minting so that it appropriately finds out it. Now it is not only will be done by me, it will be done by multiple people, and whoever basically gets the first nouns which gives these leading zeros wins, and he gets the chance to basically form the block. So this is what when you mine it, you can also do it from that website that I referred. You can yourself do this mining exercise. So it finds out another number 71850, which gives a 4 leading zero. So this becomes a valid block. Okay. Now, if I change anything like the block number or whatever it is, again it becomes an invalid block. Okay. Now let us look at how these blocks are chained together. So how cryptographic hashing ties this string together in a series of blocks. So blocks are assembled in a chronological order and goes along as we wish. So it starts from the 2009. It has been going on. Now let us look at these two. One is the Genesis block, that is the first block which was created in 2009, and the next block, which is the block number 2. Okay. Now you look at, we have added another field to it, that is previous. That is how it is linked. If you know the linked list in data structure and all, you know double linked list, single linked list, how they are linked to each other, correct? So similar way here, these blockchains are linked to each other by the hash values. So there is a previous and the current hash value. Now what happens is when for the Genesis block there is no previous because that's the beginning of it. Then what for the block 2 you have a previous. Basically this has to be same. Okay. Now then we have a new hash value. Now this new hash value is not only block nouns and data, it is also adding the previous hash. Okay, so now this hash value is a hash value created by the like the complete text of the block number, nouns, data, and the previous hash value. So once you do get this hash value, you know now the concept, correct? Now even if you change this, the Genesis block, this also becomes invalid. So if we go like that, the block number 2 and 3 are linked with like previous to hash value, and the previous one is written here. So it just goes in a chain and then works like that. So see, this blockchain concept is not very difficult, but the way it is used is simply very, it is very beautiful and then very powerful. Okay. The beauty is if you change information, suppose I want to change something in block number 3. Now anything after not only block number 3 will become pink, anything after that will become pink because they are linked together, and you don't have a way to correct all together starting from that. So that is why it becomes immutable, so that you cannot change information once it is already, basically the chain is already created. So that is how it is done. Now the difficulty level is something what we understood is, so as I told you, that the puzzle is to create a hash value by changing the nouns, which has 4 trailing leading zeros. Okay. Now day by day the computing power also increases. Everybody increases the computing power. So what they do is every 2 weeks the difficulty level is increased. For example, if this week it is 4 leading zeros, the next after 2 weeks, like basically 15 days, it will be 5 leading zeros. Then it will be 6 leading zeros. Like that, it goes on increasing. Okay, the difficulty level goes on increasing every 2 weeks, just to ensure that it still takes 10 minutes to mine the new block. So that it should not take more than 10 minutes, because every 10 minutes we have to mine a block, correct? So that's the way the difficulty level changes. Yeah. So the 4 basic components of a Bitcoin is cryptography, then software, hardware, and gaming theory. Gaming theory is just to find out the appropriate nouns. Okay, to have if you have a better algorithm, you can use it, correct? So this is kind of a game that you do it. Okay, now if you look at the flow of process, now having understood how blockchain works and all, Bitcoin software is there. Then there is a new cryptography challenge approximately every 10 minutes is put. Miners race to solve this challenge. Everybody will work on that to ensure that they get the first nouns which can create the 4 leading zeros or 5 leading zeros, whatever is defined at that appropriate time. That is the place where actually they compete with each other, because who becomes first is the question there. Then one miner will solve this problem. Whoever is lucky will solve this problem. Then once it is solved, the rest of the miners basically collaborate with each other to ensure that the block which is created is appropriate, it's correct. Okay, once everybody consensusly says that yes, the block which is created is appropriate, then only this block will be added to the previous blocks. So it will be appended to the blockchain. Okay, and having won the thing, the miner who has won it will get some Bitcoin, and that is how actually Bitcoin is created. There is no way. See, like we get salaries, money we get, and then our money is added to the account, correct? Not, but in case of Bitcoin, it doesn't happen like that. In case of Bitcoin, the Bitcoin has to be earned. The Bitcoin has to be earned in the process of mining. So a miner gets a Bitcoin. If he wins that particular puzzle, it gets it. Now, when we discussed about that collaborative thing where they do consensus, so there are a number of consensus algorithm which are used. The one which we explained about the Bitcoin is actually called the proof of work. So basically, that who have access to good amount of computing power and who can do it fast enough wins that, and then does the thing, and then because he also gets some Bitcoin out of that process. Now, because it is Bitcoin, we have understood, okay, it is fine. But then we are talking about blockchain applied to multiple other applications. Is it possible to always use the same proof of work? No. So we can have multiple different types of consensus algorithm. One of them is proof of stake. In proof of stake, they actually kind of put some digital money at stake. Okay, saying that, okay, it's like kind of it's kind of what do you call that, you give some basic thing saying that, okay, I'm it's like our they play that cards and other things, correct? Okay, I'm now promising that if I win, if I lose, then I'll give this much money, or such stakes. Okay, so proof of stake is something also been used in multiple applications. But Intel recently have come out with something called proof of elapsed time, which actually is a reasonably okay kind of proof, because proof of work needs lots of computing power. So the idea was to ensure that this computing power, hardware requirement, other things can be avoided, and but still have a consensus algorithm. So Intel came out with this proof of elapsed time, where there is a program which everybody can run. It's a single source of program that will generate a random time. Okay, now for that random time, the nodes has to keep silent. Now whoever gets the least random time, that means whoever will wake up after the random sleep time will actually make the block. Okay, this is something which, okay, if we go, I don't want to get into detail of that, but it's a way which is much more kind of efficient and kind of a fair way to do it, because it randomly selects a miner. Otherwise, like if I have a supercomputer to work with, I will be always winning because I am using a supercomputer to do that. There are some other consensus algorithm like proof of burn, proof of capacity, like storage capacity. Whoever can store more can win that. Like that, proof of activity, proof of weight. Lots of things are there. Now there are lots of work still going on to design new consensus algorithms for different applications, because not all consensus algorithm can be useful to all applications. Now, I thought it is important for us to understand what is cryptojacking. I don't know whether people would have already known about cryptojacking. Cryptojacking is a form of cyber attack in which a hacker hijacks a target's processing power in order to mine cryptocurrency on the hacker's behalf. For example, if I have a computer which is connected to network, when I am not using it, these cryptojackers can actually use my computer to do the mining, because miners are always in search for computing power, correct? Now they will be searching for, okay, wherever free computing power is. See, they don't want to spoil your they don't want to steal your data, they don't want to do anything, but what they basically need is they need some processing power. So if without your knowledge, they can actually use your computer, and that's what is called cryptojacking. Now, how this cryptojacking works, it's very important that malicious emails install this this kind of codes, which when if you click on them, it will actually put a code behind it. And whenever you are not using it, or you are in idle position, or there are lots of computing power left, they will automatically contact something, and then they will start, because every 10 minutes you need to mine something or other. So that is when they will mine. So you need to be very, very careful when you receive some mails without unknown attachments and other things, because they might start using your computer. And we have faced it in our organization also. We have faced many times these kind of things happening. So sending money over internet, the usual way is to have third-party agents. But now with the Bitcoin, or the blockchain, we make it peer-to-peer. That means we have removed the mediator in between, and the work is shared among thousands of computers distributing the load. There is no central control, no central repository of data, no overarching organizations like RBI to control them, and trustless because there's no need of certifying or bringing trust into the picture. So all these things are possible in a distributed, trustless, and consensus manner. Now, just to understand, is it like Bitcoin is the only digital currency? No. Only thing is that Bitcoin is the largest cryptocurrency which is available currently. India, it is not illegal, but there is no mechanism or a process to use, because unless I can buy something using Bitcoin in India, why should I invest into? Unless I want to buy something from US and all, maybe I can still have Bitcoin, but otherwise it is not illegal in India. There is a lot of confusion. People feel it is illegal, but it's not so. And how is this Bitcoin process? Like RBI controls our currency, correct? They can print currency, rupees whenever they want. Of course, they may be using some logic, how much to print and other things, but they have the power to do it. But in Bitcoin, it's not like that. Bitcoin has to be earned. So every time a miner wins the thing, he gets some Bitcoin, which actually is the new Bitcoin. It's just added. So what they have estimated is they will be adding these Bitcoins or be giving Bitcoins as incentive till they reach 21 million Bitcoins. Okay, which is estimated that by 2140 they will reach about 21 million Bitcoins. So that's how it is done. So there are lots of other currencies like Bitcoin, which mines at every 10 minutes. There is something called Litecoin, which mines at every 2.5 minutes. And there is something called Jetcash. But these are all pseudonymous. Basically, what you mean by pseudonymous is that the transactions can be tracked. Means, though you are not using your own identity, you are using your public, the cryptographic identity. So you can be still tracked, saying that, okay, this to this person it has done. But there are something which are anonymous, which is more dangerous, where the transactions are not traceable. Typically, these are all used for international wrong transactions and other things. Okay. Now, people always feel that blockchain and Bitcoins are synonymous, but there are three particular property. If any application needs these three particular property, they can use Bitcoin. One is trust. If you want an environment where it has to be trustless, but still the basic idea behind trust is maintained. And the other one is value, which enables a unique asset to be transferred. Okay, and then you can have reliability. If you need these three, it can be used. So I like this statement. If Bitcoin is a golden egg, blockchain actually is a golden hen. Okay, just Bitcoin is one application of blockchain. Now, the advantages of blockchain: it has unparalleled security because it is immutable, it is authenticated. Execution speed because it's distributed. So not one computer is doing it, multiple computers are doing it, so it is much faster. Transparency is maintained because everybody has the same information. Then the cost reduction, cost of validation is distributed. So not one person takes the cost. Right now, your bank takes most of the cost of computation and other things, but in this case, it is all distributed. Then ability to audit record, because it is chronologically already linked, you can actually audit it much easier way. And versatility, because it's not only but Bitcoin, it's lots of other applications it can be used. Because multiple copies are available, there is no single point of failure. Even if one node is down for something, doesn't matter, because we have the same copy available in multiple places. And any fraud can be easily identified. Now, if the limitations of blockchain, this is basically the problem is we are still in an early stage. It has not like this application has not become that much this one. So there is no lack of awareness. People don't understand much. The clarity is not there, and also technical talent is very limited. Immutable is the advantage of blockchain, but then there may be scenarios where you may want to have a conditional reversal or modification. There are many things where it is not that simple that, okay, once it is written, is written. So those kind of things blockchain cannot handle. Key management is always an issue, how to handle the public-private key pairs and other things. And the major problem is scalability. When this thing grows, now today 100 nodes, 200 nodes, 300 nodes, because as the nodes increase, the time, the computation, the everything goes up. So scalability becomes a bigger issue. So I just want to understand from the organizers how much time left so that I can go to the applications.
You have another, actually, you can wind up so that because there are a couple of questions which you may want to, some interesting questions.
Okay. So what I will do is I will just I will go through some important applications, then I will wind up.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So applications of blockchain, it is used in financial services. Maybe the slides can be shared, so I don't want to get into details. It can actually replace our current, of course, Bitcoin is also used, it started with that. We can do asset management. We can do insurance claim processing, which are kind of where lots of frauds and other things happen. Then we can do cross-border payments much faster and much easier way. Already there are companies who do that. Then smart contract is a very important application, which is a program which actually makes it automatic. For example, your claim process or your vehicle insurance claim process and all. Now, every time you have to struggle, you have to apply, but there can be something like, if this is this, then that money can be transferred. So it's all can be made automated. Then smart properties, like having properties like land registration and all those things can be actually done in a much more transparent manner. Now there are issues when somebody goes to register the property, he registers, comes out, but then somebody say, oh, how did you register with the original landowner is somebody else. So those kind of things can be avoided using that. And money lending processes and all can be made more fair. And Internet of Things is another application of blockchain, where security can be provided by blockchain, and trust can also be provided by blockchain. Healthcare is another application. Healthcare is something where I think AI, blockchain, whatever essential things I have shown, even robotics, drones, everything can actually have applications in healthcare. There is none of the building blocks doesn't have applications in healthcare. Then lots of these copyright issues, like basically music and other things, can be taken care. And then our identities like birth certificate, marriage certificate, death certificate, all those can be basically managed through blockchain. It becomes easy to rather than holding a birth certificate physical and going around, you can actually, that can be actually it can be proved using blockchain. That is good enough. So to conclude, blockchain, I think I have enough explained. It enables creation of real-time movement of digital assets, embedded trust rules inside the transaction and interactions. So it is impacting large number of applications, financial services, government services, healthcare, energy markets, supply chain, and also it applies everywhere. But there are different things, like everybody say, oh, now blockchain can be used everywhere, this, that, and all. So there is a problem between hype versus reality. So hype is that, okay, we can move to blockchain anytime to anywhere. There's nobody can stop it. That is the next internet kind of thing. Then no problem, it is the best. But the reality is that it has immense potential. There's no doubt about it. But it needs development to scale. The scalability is an issue, and that is useful if used effectively in specific business use cases. We need to look at specific use case and look at that whether we can use it. So thank you very much. I think at this time I can only say stay home, stay safe because of this pandemic. So thank you. Any question, I will be happy to answer.
Thank you, Dr. Patra. You have given us this wonderful talk, and you have covered nearly all the aspects of blockchain, and it was very interesting talk. We are also here in Jio also trying to apply blockchain to 5G and kind of things. Work is going on in that area also.
Yes, yes.
So we have some very interesting question from students.
Okay.
The first question is from Ravi Kiran. He's asking that does the hashing problem not have a closed form inverse solution? Are the algorithms iterative?
Okay. See, hashing function is actually a one-way algorithm. It is not reversible. Okay. Because just think in a mathematical sense that what you are giving input is some X amount of information, and what you are getting out is only less than X amount of information. It's a kind of a fixed number. That basically means that you are losing information. Wherever you are actually losing information, it is irreversible. You should not get confused with compression. See, compression process also basically a bigger size file is converted to a smaller size file, but the information is not lost in that. Okay, because basically what in compression is does is useless informations are removed while the other things are put together, so that becomes a compression. That's why in binary form and all you don't get much compression benefits, while for text and other things you get good compression ratios and all. But in hashing, it is a property which is used. Hashing is not a new concept. It has been used from the beginning of Unix. Like the first application of hashing was the password. Okay, so when you enter a password, whatever is the size of your password, what it actually stores inside your password file is actually a hashed output, which is a constant string. Okay, that is because from that constant string you cannot go back. So it is not a reversible process. It is a irreversible process. So that's the first thing. What was the second point in that question?
That are the algorithms iterative?
Iterative basically means that you do together, correct, like one after other. Now here it is used in an iterative manner because
Iterative, not interactive, iterative. So basically he's asking if it is repetitive, like the same steps to be repeated.
Yeah, the hashing algorithms, there are lots of hashing algorithms. The one hashing algorithm which is used is called Merkle tree. Okay, where like suppose you have multiple things inputs, they actually block them into pairs, and then at every like kind of tree structure they do that. Now what is done in hash is basically that the Merkle algorithm is used. So I don't know whether we should call it as iterative, but it is kind of a tree structure. For for example, if I have 100 inputs, the next layer will have only 50 inputs. Then the next layer will have 25. Like that, it goes to one input. Like that becomes kind of the top of the tree. Okay, so that is how it is put. So I don't know whether I should call it as iterative or not, but the structure is like that. So whatever you give it, if it is 100, 200, 500, 600, whatever you give it, it actually works in that tree structure. It's only like if the input is more, it will take a little more time to get to that one particular value.
Yeah, got it. Something like binary algorithm.
Yes,
right?
yes.
So the next question is, what is the difference between blockchain and Hyperledger?
See, Hyperledger is actually one application of blockchain.
This is from Pawan.
Yeah, okay. So Hyperledger is a application of blockchain. I think Hyperledger, if I remember, it is from IBM, who had designed Hyperledger as a kind of a framework. Okay. Now we can use Hyperledger where the blockchain is the building block. See, as I told you, blockchain is not an application. It is actually a building block. Okay. Now Hyperledger uses blockchain as a building block for usage into multiple things. Now like Ethereum or Hyperledger, those are the frameworks which are provided so that you can implement your smart applications and all those applications like healthcare I want to implement. I can use Hyperledger or Ethereum platform to develop them. Okay, but the basic building block is the blockchain. Now it can differ in terms of what is the consensus algorithm you use. Like Hyperledger, what I understand is they use proof of stake, and recently I think they have started working on proof of elapsed time also. While like the Bitcoin, which is another application of blockchain, they use proof of work. So Hyperledger is not synonym to blockchain. Blockchain is the basic building block. Hyperledger is one of the framework which is developed by IBM for designing lots of applications, so that the user doesn't have to worry much about what blockchain, how it works. Those kind of things are all actually kept away from the basic user.
Thank you so much. And then there is from SM Prabhu. So SM Prabhu is asking that many countries are apprehensive of using blockchain. The confidentiality is not there since every transaction is visible to all. Also, banks, RBI and government has no control on any money transaction. So I think he's commenting and expects your response on it.
Yeah, that is true. I think that's the basis on which so far none of these countries are completely into blockchain for money transaction. See, that's why I think in the beginning I told you I'm not a specific fan of Bitcoin, but Bitcoin makes me explain blockchain in a much simpler manner. That's why I spoke about it. Yes, I also feel that as far as application into financial, that this kind of currency, it may not scale much. Now itself, it has already reached a state where it takes too much time for this consensus and other things, and also these legal requirements like if something wrong happens, who will handle? But many things are technical in that. It's basically algorithm which does that. But I don't see much future in Bitcoin and other things for blockchain. But blockchain has future in other things, other applications like land registrations, then maybe like what we are applying it to vehicular communication and all, where autonomous vehicles and other things. These are the places where blockchain has bright futures. While as I think he correctly mentioned the real problems in having cryptocurrency as the only currency to transact. It may not happen. It may not be. See if Bitcoin would have been a fair application, the owner who started this would not have kept himself into secret. That name is not actually a proper name. We don't still know whether it's a person or a group or whatever it is. So I don't see much of a legal future for Bitcoin, but as a blockchain, it has real future. It will be used in multiple applications, and it will have various good things.
Okay. So there are quite a lot of many questions, like Pavan is asked what type of records you can keep in a blockchain. Then Akshay is asked, is it possible in blockchain to remove one or more blocks from network, and how does it affect the chain? And how does it affect the ledger? Then Ravi Kiran has asked, how ethical are users of organization who use server farms for cryptocurrency mining? Is there any regulation on such techniques? Then there is a question from Vikram, is blockchain meant only for cryptocurrency? Then Ravi Kiran is asking, how is monetary value of cryptocurrency determined at any point of time? Then Pavan is asking, what is our 51% attack? Then Akshay has asked, what do we expect Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies to be legally accepted by our RBI as a form of payment for certain goods and services, like there is in USA and other countries? Then there are lots and lots of questions, sir. So I think we are already like our time limit was 8 and we have crossed the time limit. So I think we should be, is it fine? So I'm feeling that I'll send you the questions on mail, and the replies I will share on our group. So we have I think I'll share with the KS school with Akshay and Pavan, and then they can forward to the respective participants. So is that fine with you?
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. I can answer those questions.
Okay. So with this, I'll just hand over to the KS School committee and team, so they can take over. Please, yeah.
Yeah. Sadhana, can you make a vote of thanks, ma'am?
Yes, sir. Dr. Karthik, you can take up and you can continue, sir. Yeah.
Okay. So, Sadhana. Sadhana is there? Sadhana?
Sorry to interrupt. Before that, the entire committee, can you switch on your video? We'll take a selfie, meaning a screenshot.
Yeah.
That is, yeah. Divya ma'am. Pushpamala. Can you turn on your video? Pushpamala. Okay. I think all are here except Pushpamala. Pushpamala, will you be able to turn on the video? Okay, otherwise. Thank you. Thank you so much. You can switch off the video. Thank you.
Sadhana?
Yeah, I'll just unmute Sadhana. I think she's unable to unmute herself.
Yeah, thank you. Now we have come to the end of this lively gathering. Prior to ending it up, I would like to extend our hearty vote of thanks to our speaker, Dr. G.K. Patra, sir. It is an honor for us that you thought of being here amidst your busy schedule, and I must mention our deep sense of appreciation for your explanation on blockchain technology. I thank all the audience for your participation in this event, and I thank KSSEM Student Branch MDC team, IEEE Bangalore section, and also I thank Madam Divya MG, Joint Director, CDAC, MDC Chair, IEEE Bangalore section, and I thank Soma Pandey ma'am, GM Geo Platforms Limited, MDC Co-Chair, and Dr. Pushpalata ma'am, Professor in DSU, and the entire IEEE Membership Development Committee. And I also thank our KSSEM IEEE Chair, Girish V. Attimaraj sir, for your support, the student branch mentors, coordinators, and all the members. I also thank all the teachers and my dear friends for being part of this webinar and making it a successful one. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. And it was a very nice evening with you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity, ma'am. And thanks, Dr. Patra, sir,
Thank
for
you.
your
Thank you very
valuable
much.
inputs.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Patra, sir. Satyanarayana.
Thank you. Hello, sir. How are you?
Fine.
I didn't notice you that. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.